Alright, so I want to quickly just start this video off, talk to you all about my design process for my third underquilt that I've made, and hopefully it'll help you all out. I've just, pardon the probably poor quality, I'm not very great at editing and doing videos, but I've provided a couple of the photos that show kind of my template for doing this. And essentially what I've mapped out is one of the photos or drawings is of the inner shell, and one is for the outer shell. And you can kind of look through it and get a sense of it. And if people have questions, I can post some more detail potentially. But essentially, it lays out all necessary aspects for each part of drawing out all your lines, for all of your seam allowances, for the baffles marked to account for differential, to also account for creating the walls around the perimeter of the quilt, the vertical walls that create the boxed sides. All those things have to be help to be accounted for in the planning process. And I've found, after this is my third one, kind of poor planning leads to sort of inadequacies and problems. So I ended up doing this one pretty good, and I feel pretty good about it. This was a really helpful process. So I won't get all into the specifics too much, but you'll note some of the differences between the inner and the outer shell is some of the dimensions of the quilted area is that, and we'll talk more about this later, but if you don't understand what a differential is, we'll probably have to refer you to a separate video. But the inner shell will have a certain length, and the outer shell, length and width, and then the outer shell will have a greater length and width, and ultimately that outer shell will be sewn on to that smaller dimensions of the inner shell proportion, and that's what gives you a differential cut, so to speak. And what that does is that as you use the underquilt, and it sort of conforms to you from in usage, and tightening up the whole underquilt real nice and snug, it doesn't risk compression between the layers, that you'll maintain the loft, the distance between the inner and the outer layer that gives you the effective insulation. So there's some differences there you'll note in the dimensions. That's that. I'll just go on to show you now more about my building process. Hopefully that'll be helpful to some folks. Okay, so this is the outer shell that I have all marked up, again using soap and a long 72-inch straight edge. You can kind of see how I did it here. I got 92 inches marked here and here, straight ledge. I got my my different measurements for the perimeter of the outer shell that I'll hem before I do anything really. If you do the hem, if you do a little bit of a hem, I found first before you sew it onto the inner shell, it can be a little easier. And then I got my spacing for the loft here, and then each of the 14 baffles marked. These are about 4 inches apart, giving me a differential. Width-wise, there's also a longer length for the differential too. What I'm going to do next is decide on where to mark for the pleats for both the. I'm sorry, that was for the inner shell. We're not going to mark pleats for this outer shell because this is the longer pieces. So we'll mark pleats for the inner shell next. And here it is after I've cut it. Just to quickly show y'all how I do the cuts. I use these acrylic boards here that you get, and keep it taped down and just put it under it, and carefully use the rotary knife. Makes a quick job of cutting the extra fabric after you've measured it a couple times and got everything straight. So that's what it kind of looks like now. I'll cut here, and there it is. So ready to go back to the inner shell and mark off spots. Alright, so this is the inner shell, and I don't know if I can show you here what I did, but I went back and coordinated multiple lines, marks for each of the baffles and the edges perimeter of the quilt where I'll put the pleats so that they all line up and don't pull unevenly. It's kind of what I did on one of my last builds, but what I did is concentrate 4-inch ones apart. I have about 10 to 12 1-inch pleats I can do that are about 1/2 inch that you just fold over about 1/2 inch. And I just saw where like I basically laying down on it where my like low point is and the feet, and I concentrated a few at the feet, a few at the butt, lower point, and then a couple just in between. And we'll hope that pattern works out well. I'm still fiddling with this placement of the pleats, but the last one I just did plenty of them like this, and it turned out fine. So hopefully this one will turn out a little bit better. We'll see. I hope that helps though. I just started by putting, just took this ruler here and marked. I kind of knew about how many total, so I just marked, and it was about, divided it out however many pleats you're going to do by the total length of the quilted area, and then kind of have a sense of where to start from. I started by putting the number that are concentrated here, and then spacing what was left out in the areas that are less critical, I guess, that see less stretch along the length of the quilt. Having built a couple underquilts now, this area here where your butt is gets the most compression up around your feet. You get a decent amount too where your heels press in, and that should do it. We'll see how that goes. So as I go along and sew and hit one of these marks, I'll lay down a 1/2 inch pleat. As I get down about halfway, I tend to stop and just check the length of the baffle and see how much further, make sure I don't do too many pleats where I come up short. My measurement should be pretty good though, so I shouldn't have that problem. I didn't have it last time, but you want to be careful. Worst case scenario, you get these in, I think, and then the rest of these are a little less critical, maybe. So that's my view. Hope that helps. I forgot to video this part, but what I do to make the baffles is take the full length of the material, and I usually do more than that. So I need 92 inches for the outer shell, and that's what I cut the baffles to. So I usually cut them some amount more than that, just to give me plenty of leeway. So maybe, instead of 92 inches, maybe 100 inches or something like that. So I pull out 100 inches and mark it on both sides, cut it. That was a 100-inch cut. And then I just take it and roll it evenly up into about that much, all the way till you get a long piece that folded over. And then you just simply mark your spacing. Mine are 3 inches raw cut, and they'll be 2.5 inches after sewn. So I just mark take my little ruler, I'll show you. I had it. Well, anyway, I have a ruler, and I just mark 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches on 2 spots on each at intervals, and then I take a ruler, straight edge, and then my rotary knife and cut each of them out, giving you a total of 12. I'm gonna have 12 baffles, 12 of these. So when you're done, they unfold to be your baffles. So that's that. And it doesn't have to be exact. Don't like freak out, but as long as you do a pretty careful job of it, it'll be usable. And I have a little extra left over here. It was left, so that was that. Yeah. We'll move on to Alright, just to show you all, pardon the background noise, my kids are watching a movie. I'm going to show you kind of how I sew on this stuff. So I've already started this baffle, sewing it on, and I just line it up, start to sew. I got my little lines marked. I usually use about 1/4 inch, and the way that I do it is I line it up with my presser foot, where the edge of the presser foot is going to touch the edge of this foot here, and that gives me the reference point. And then I also look ahead to the white line to make sure I'm basically tracking along the white line. And I just take my fingertip here and line up to where I get I line up and press down here, and that'll hold it as I feed it through. And then I don't pull at it. I don't reach back here with this machine. Some machines, I don't know if they wouldn't handle it right. Once I have it lined up, it goes pretty easy. Once you get a hang of like placing it, you can really kind of go through it pretty good. Now I've been doing this a lot of times now, so I've gotten pretty good at sewing this pretty fast. But when you start out, you might just kind of go real slow with it, But I found that once you get the setup right, going slow to me feels like I have less control. I don't know, that's probably not true, but and it doesn't have to be exact, because the baffle will kind of shift and move how you cut it a little bit, and it'll move around a little bit, but as long as you get it fairly in line with what you're shooting for, you'll be good with the result. And you can notice I don't fold it. I'm interested in trying that one day, but some people fold over a half a fold over, kind of like a hem, and sew it down. It probably increases the strength of the seam a little bit for the material because you have holding 2 ply of the material, but I'm too lazy for that, and it would for me seem kind of annoying, but I'll have to try it. I don't know. And then you just kind of keep moving on. And the other side, this is when you first attach this baffle. Eventually you'll have this free side. Sewing the free side onto the other layer is a little more tedious, but I'll show you that in a separate little clip. But it's not too bad, but it definitely is managing more fabric and all that. So I'll show you real quick how. The trick is you got to make sure and have a real good sense of your fabric and feeling it and making sure you don't get something under it, because if you sew over 2 layers, you're gonna really damage your product and have to use your seam ripper and put holes in it, and you'll get more and more comfortable sewing this. I have, and I can track it right along. So, that's that. Hopefully that will help you kind of think about it and plan for your quilt. I'm going to show you the other side. Just to show you what I do at the corners, like other people showed me, is I'm going to have channels around the whole perimeter. This makes the corners a lot easier, is that you fold down twice to a roll hem on the corner, making it look, see if I can't, like that. Let me show you really quick at another corner what it looks like raw. Let me get this pointed down here. I'll give you a sense of it. I can try to get this angled right like that. See, there's the corner, and then you roll it down once and then twice, and that gives you a channel. And when I go to sew it, I use some tissue paper, which I just use paper towels, but you can use parchment paper or like wrapping tissue paper, and put it underneath of this when I feed it through, because whenever you work around these edges, sometimes the machine can want to bunch up the fabric and act up. So that's just a trick. If you ever sew around the perimeters and real close to things, use that around the edges. It'll make your life way easier. And you just put a line of stitches here to close it, and when you go to fold the other side over, it creates a nice clean channel opening. Just to show you that in real time, take the corner, fold it down once, twice there, set that up, keep it held, come over to the machine, see if I can't rotate my camera here to show you that. Okay, and you got your tissue paper over your fabric onto it here like this. Get it on there, close your presser foot. Once you got it there, lock your stitch to the back, and then all the way to the end on this one. Lock it, close it, done. When you're done, this here just rips off of the seam. You'll have little pieces or whatever, but clean it up later if you need to. And just a quick correction, I wasn't making channels earlier. I was just kind of closing up the hems around the edge of this outer shell. One thing that might be different than how I've done my underquilts is that I don't like to take the inner and the outer shell and sew them together. I like to kind of sew the outer shell independently down on the inner shell. Like, so if this is the inner shell, then I have more room on the inner shell over here, and then I sew this down to it, and then I create my channel with the inner shell extra fabric that I've like planned for. So that's a slight difference. So what I'm doing here is just doing a roll hem on this whole perimeter of my quilt outer shell, so that I can just very easily put a line of stitch or two down to the once I get all the baffles attached, if that makes sense. So just kind of showing you what I'm doing here. I'd already marked off the thing. I should have, by the way, this is a lesson you should learn that I had to learn. Make sure to put this hem down before you start doing your baffles. It'll just make this a lot easier, because you have to kind of be careful of the baffles as you go through. So I've started the roll hem up at the other side, but and then you just kind of go right through it. You have to see, in this case, I have to kind of be careful not to go over the baffles that I had done, and do that. I actually remembered to do this when I got 5 or 6 baffles in and realized that I still need to do it. And then remembered and went in and did it. So I closed off all 4 sides of the quilt this way, leaving a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of a roll hem. And that'll make for an easy job of sewing it down when the time comes. And before I start sewing this inner shell onto the outer shell, I'll do all the hemming and all that's the channel work, the channels on the inner shell, before I get sewing anything together. If you ever make the mistake, or I guess it's not a mistake, but if you ever put the quilt together, stuff it, and then try to sew together, like to do channels or something like after the fact, it's kind of a pain. So if you get everything done before stuffing, it's easier. This is my inner shell, and so I'll do the exact same thing. I haven't even put a baffle down in this one yet. I just have them all marked out. I have a larger hem allowance, seam allowance for this, to allow me to have plenty of room to make a channel comfortably. I think I did a 3-inch allotment here so that I could have an easy to do 1-inch channel for the whole deal around it. So it'll make for an easy job. I also have, on this is the head end or the foot end. I have to look at it a little closer, because there is a head and a foot end how I mark the baffle, the pleats. But on either the head or the foot end, there is, you hem down straight down to where the quilt starts on the length side, and I explain this in the directions. You can see it here a little bit. I have the area for the hem, the roll hem channel. But I also have this area here, which is kind of like a wiggle room area, and then this is where the actual quilt baffles will start. So I'll have kind of an extra bit of space here. I kind of planned it that way, on a bit of a whim. On the sides, having it kind of pull up a little extra fabric here. This will let me have an easy place to do quilt. If my buddy decides they like it, to attach quilt hooks and other modifications like that. It just gives me a little bit extra wiggle room. Didn't cost me much. So just notice that little difference in my quilt design. And so what I'm going to do now is do the exact same thing here, is make a big, on all the corners, make a large roll hem. Since this is a bigger one, I'll probably make it fairly large where it takes up most of the space here, like that, and then I'll hem that up, or I'll close that up like I did before, and do it for all the 4 corners. And then I can do the channels around the whole perimeter of the quilt, and we'll just see how that goes. So, also, I don't know that I've mentioned this yet, but I've also, this is the inner shell. I'm going to explain, I'm going to have, just for fun, 2 different ways of suspending it, either simultaneously or to play around with these quilts. I've decided to go with the traditional design where we have channels along the long ends and the head and the foot end, and you can cinch up the feet just like a standard underquilt. But I've also included the clue design. Leviola from Hammock Forums has written a lot about this sort of old style navy clue design that sort of attaches several points for attachment of nettles, as they call them, shot cord or some other material, from 8 different points or more that kind of come in and all connect at one central point, and then you attach those kind of like some other types of underquilt designs, but this will be kind of interesting. It doesn't cost me anything more. I've got these marked off 8 different intervals, 5¼ inches across the 42-inch width of the quilt. And I'm gonna, just as I sew the roll hem channel, I'm gonna put down, I've cut a total of 16 of these little, I cut them 4 inches long. It'll be 2 inches, 2-inch loop like this, and I'll sew down to each of those points I've marked off a little loop like this to allow attachment for each nettle. You know, he's not, my buddy who's making these for his kids is not like caring about the weight particularly, so this lets me kind of toy around with some other suspension designs for fun at no real cost extra, so it should be fun. And I'll just sew these on as I go along and see how that goes. I haven't decided if I'll sew them individually after putting down the first stitch for the channel, so I think more about that. I've opted to just kind of, I tend to use a long stitch for all of my just channels and stuff that's not like holding a ton of weight, just because it makes it faster and it looks a little neater to me. My longest stitch on this machine isn't really long, so anyway, what I've decided to do with these nettle attachment points is sew along. I got my spots marked with the thing I can see as I go along, and when I get up near one, I stop and lift the presser foot before I reach it, have this folded down in half, and I'm lining up the end of it flush with the channel up against the needle. I raise it up because sometimes it's hard to run over this, and then when I put it down it's ready to go. And then I just, so this is sort of basting the thing down. It might only put 1 stitch in it. I'll run backwards one time, but it only runs at like 1 stitch on it, and what I might do is go back and run like a bar tack, zigzag type of stitch on these, just to kind of give them a little extra security. I did a quick test with some extra fabric with it, and even just a standard couple stitches is really a high amount of shear tension that it can hold, so it's pretty much a non-issue. But just to kind of be a little safer than sorry, I'll probably add a bar tack after running this first stitch that's making the channel, but this just kind of puts them in place and makes it easy to go back and do it. Alright, what I decided to do was baste these on originally just with the stitch as I go along, and then to come back with a tiny little bar tack, just to show you my settings on my brother. It is a zigzag on a 0.9 length and a 1.0 width, so it's a very tiny zigzag. You don't need a ton of stitches to hold these, but this will just kind of give me a little bit of reinforcement, so I can just come in with the bar tack here and just line it up here around the edge there, and put it in there, and a couple of those, done deal. Yep. And as you can see, let's see if you can see it there. Well, you can't really see it well there, but it's a little tiny bar tack. I could make it a wider stitch. I may actually widen it up, but it actually achieves the same basic end result, so I feel good about that. And I'll do that on all. Show y'all, like, I just got done cutting. I had like about 100+ inches of full length of the no-seam mesh, and then I just rolled it over on itself, keeping the edges lined up and even. And then I marked the 3.5 inch. I'm sorry, the 3-inch widths for the cut, and 2 spots for each width from each other, and then just 2, and then I line straight edge up, rotary knife, cut them, and that's it. That's how you do that. Just to quickly show, after sewing the outer shell, this is the shell that'll be longer and wider than the inner shell, which will be yellow. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 baffles making walls, making 12 total chambers. You'll notice here on the edges that the way I've drawn it out, you have to plan for it this way. This goes back to the planning. You have your planned channel here, that your last one, you don't sew a line in this last one, and I plan the extra 2.5 inches, and that will sew down to create the loft. So if you don't plan for that, you'll end up sewing this down like this, and it'll squeeze this compartment smaller than what you necessarily want, which won't be the end of the world. It just means the edges will be a little less loft. But I basically created enough extra fabric so that when I sew down this, and here you can see I went ahead and hemmed up the edges with a little roll hem, so that it'll be easy just to sew it down to the inner shell directly. So I'll show that a little later, but ready to go to the next step. And you'll notice too, by the way, before I go on, that I created also an extra lofted area for the ends, okay? So it's boxed off at the end. I also sewed the full length of the cut. I think this in total was 92 inches, if I remember. Don't quote me on that. I have to go back and look. And I sewed these all the way to the end. And by doing this, it makes it easy to do the corners. You don't have to do any kind of corners. I just basically take it down, sew it down, and there's a little extra material here, but it's not really a problem per se. I guess if you want to be really fancy, you could, you know, do something where you do this or whatever, but don't worry about it. And on to the next stage. All right, so here's a sharing of process. In my case, what I did so I got my outer shell, my inner shell all marked out and have estimated, sort of guesstimated all the marks. I actually marked 11 marks that will correspond with the pleats to take this outer shell baffle length, which is longer than the inner shell, and see how many. So I made 11 pleats using pins. I should have videoed it, but I just did like 11 pleats evenly done in these and just kind of pinned them to hold that, and then measured the length from where I wanted it. And actually, I want the ends to still be lofted all the way to the end, so this area here is actually vertical, so really this doesn't start measuring until about right here, 2.5 inches in on the baffle. So I did that. I kind of started it and then kind of slowly stretched it out. You know, I do it with 2 hands. You know, stretching out with the pleats that I put in it, just little temporary ones, 11 of them. And as long as the 11 pleats that I did, about, you know, about a 1/2 inch pleat for each one, and then I lined it up. What I found out is I was a little bit short. I came up, when I finished my first time, I actually came up about even. So I was like that, but it actually needs to be like that, to where it's even with that, for the vertical, for the loft. So that's really what it'll end. So I removed a couple, and that lined me up pretty good. So I'm thinking 9. So I'm probably gonna go back and erase a couple of these marks, but to kind of like reevaluate it. I probably will remove one or two at the head end, and then like one at the head end, one at the foot end, and leave, and not mess with any in the middle. So it should be interesting, and then just kind of go with it and see what happens. I know from previous experience it'll generally work, and I'm not terribly worried. I have plenty of differential in place. I don't think I'll get much compression, but that's kind of the process I use for this. And then the outer shell will be the same thing, but you know, so I suspect what I'll do is at the outer shell this time is similarly with the inner one. Before I sew it down, I'll probably do a few pleats with like just magic clips, make sure it all lines up good this time before I sew it down, to make sure it all is good, and then sew it down. So should work out pretty good. Feeling pretty good. I actually still have to sew up the channel here, and here, and then I'm going to start sewing on each of these baffles with the pleats. So that'll be a little bit tenuous or tedious. All right, just to show you a little bit of the my process of sewing these on. It's hard to see here, but I have the lines marked for the baffles vertical, and then I have some cross marks marked for each of the spots that I'll put a pleat down, and they correspond across the whole quilt. Before I started showing these, I try to check, you know, to make sure that the pleats, I did some with just some pins, just to kind of put them down and make sure that the amount that I did, the number that I marked on here, corresponded to sort of matching up the end result. I just when you do these, when you get to the last, like, you know, maybe 2 feet, I'll just kind of quickly check it and make sure I'm not gonna come up short. Usually the way that I do it is leave it to where I have a little extra and then I'll take that way I can do the last couple pleats and to the exact amount to make it fit perfect. So I'll show you. I'm kind of already into this particular baffle, and I'll just kind of run through it real quick, and kind of show you a little bit what I'm doing. It's kind of hard to do with this. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay, so line it up. I'm going to be kind of slower than I usually am here, just kind of showing you. Here's my mark. And then when I get to my spot here I've marked, I'll just do my pleat like that. And then either I can hold it up here near it and let it kind of go over it, or you can lift the presser foot and do a pleat and then kind of put it under it and close the presser foot. I found this to be a little quicker. Take my time and let it kind of start to run over. Once it gets into it, it's good. And you just repeat that until you're done with the run. And I think I have another one right here. I'll just kind of do that. This white, well, if you do this, by the way, if you do this on yellow, don't use a white soap like I did. Use a darker color. This was a stupid mistake. Anyway, and then I get it checked out here. Here's my line. Gotta get it marked here like this. Like that. Okay. And that's that. Looks like I'm kind of home free for a bit until I get to another spot. Okay. And so this is pretty tedious. You know, with the pleats, it's even more tedious. Usually with the markings made this process for me that's too light a color really much more of a challenge, but it's a lot easier visually to do it if you have a contrasting mark, and I didn't. Kind of talked to some people online about what the best things they like to use for marking this and the lines. Seems like people are doing things different. Uh-oh, make sure I didn't run over a pleat. Hold on a second. No, I don't think I missed one. Looks like there'll be one down here a ways. Just keep going. Till you get to one of the marks. So hard to see it. You can kind of see it right there. There it is. There's my next pleat right here. I can see it. Take my finger, mark it right there, and then make the pleat. Like that. And now mark all the pleats, coordinate them so that there's no uneven pulling of the fabric when you're done in any weird spaces, or creates sort of, unusual patterns of the wrinkles when you're done for the stuff. So I'll kind of show you the end point. I'll try to show you the end in a minute and show you what the ends look like and how I did that. Alright, a quick little point of review that what I'm doing here. I got the outer shell and the inner shell all put together with the baffles and then the sides I'm working out. And one thing that I've done, I'll end up with a wall that will sew down like that, and it'll go up, and then it'll go over like that. And actually, if you look at my marks, the way that I cut the margins, this is the top of the corner of what the box wall will be, and this leaves extra fabric. If you try to put this perimeter down just square, it's all bunched up, so you have to kind of create a boxed corner. And the way that I've done that is, let me show you one of my finished corners here, is you take that, there we go, let me find it, maybe, here it is, right? Oh, that one's sewn down well. Here we go. You take, I'm going to flip it inside out. You take the fabric that was once laid out square, turn it inside out on itself, and go up near the corner and run a stitch from all the way up to that corner. Like if you were to look like this, again, that's the corner. So it looks like that. And you just sew a line here through that, and that extra bit sticks out like that. And when you're done, you turn it inside out, and you have, see if I can flip it around and show you. Yeah, a nice, I'll show you here. You have a better, well, anyway, like this. You have a corner here that you can then sew down on a square corner like that, so a little easier to manage. That's just how I did it. There's probably easier ways, I don't know. Leave it open for discussion, but that way it all looks neat and nice when I'm done. I'll show you the end result. So here's the end result of sewing the three sides down, and kind of showing you what I've done here. Kind of on a whim, I went unconventional and left this space along the edges. My thoughts were it would give me room to maybe do additions later, modifications, quilt hooks, yeah. And I kind of wish I have some space here as well, you can see at each end, so I do have room for other stuff too. And as you can see, I have these loops here all down for experimentation with different kinds of hammock, the clue suspensions. I have some ideas, kind of going through my head about what I'm going to do with this. It'll be interesting. But my buddy didn't want a Wookiee, which is what I like to make. But so this was my kind of workaround to try some different things for self-experimentation. Self-experimentation, that sounds funny, doesn't it? So you can see here, you might be able to see it here the way that, kind of hard to see in the picture, but like there's areas that have more of the pleats that look kind of weird. Some here, less of them here. See, it looks kind of more flat here, and then a couple here for the feet. So I kind of concentrated a lot where the butt and the back are at, and I have a differential lengthwise too. So we'll see how it goes. I'm gonna stuff it now. All right, my son is enjoying apparently the new Underquilt. This is what I've got so far. The Underquilt that I made, I just hung it. And let's show you underneath here. There's no compression. It's really nice. Even here at the shoulder, tons of loft. Alright, that's enough. And just to show you real quick what I've played with here, I made a sort of ad hoc suspension here of I just used some fabric to make a sort of area to collect here, so the tension under here, so you can see that, and that lets me do some adjustment too, actually. And it just gathers up here. This side just attaches direct, and then this side is attached. Alright, okay, that's enough for now. With a loop of shot cord. Like that. And then it comes down. I also did a line of cord through this part here. And that kind of gives it extra lift. And go to this side, look. freaking great, actually. I am extremely pleased with it.
Can I get out of
Not yet. Let me come over there and help you out. So you can kind of see here what I did. And I still have, it's kind of a raw cut of fabric. I might have to fiddle with it more. But
Okay.
all right, you're good. And
Can I do it?
it's great. Not yet. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. See, I mean, stop.
Okay.
And you know, the benefit to this, I think, is that, you know, once you get in it, this kind of maintains tension throughout the body of the underquilt. And whereas the only thing that would hold the tension before with a traditional underquilt just by itself, oh, I forgot I need this to be, is pulling at it like this. So essentially the tension that would come in the body would come from pulling it both ways this way. But that's pretty much a non-issue. Actually, I won't even need the shock cord that runs in the foot box, I don't think. It'll be interesting to experiment and see how it goes.